Today on the Video Maker Podcast, we're running a rerun. We're going to pull an episode out of the archives from earlier this year, our conversation with Casey Neistat. You know, we acknowledge that while we have a lot of repeat listeners, very few of our listeners have heard every episode, and this is one of our best. So Casey talks a lot about developing your own signature style in this episode, and really that's kind of a universal topic that most people will be interested in, so I hope you enjoy it. As always, if you've been listening to the podcast and you like it, we would love it if you went to iTunes or Spotify and hit the subscribe button, and it will deliver the podcast straight to your mobile device on Monday mornings, every other Monday, that is. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview with Casey Neistat. Welcome to the Video Maker Podcast. I'm Mike Wilhelm, and with me, as always, is Chris Monlux.
Hello.
And today, special guest needs no introduction, Casey Neistat. Casey, how's it going?
I'm doing well, and I want to apologize to your audience in advance for any interruptions that will most likely happen at some point throughout this podcast. There's a lock on my door, but it's not very strong, and there are two small children in this house that are pretty rambunctious.
All right. Well, we'll keep that in mind. So let's see. Let's just sort of get started. We normally will ask our guests how they got started, making videos or working in the film industry. Your story has been told 1,000 times by you and others, so maybe we could skip that portion. But I do want to kind of go back to your early days of making movies and making videos. I know you are about the same age as Chris and I, so you must have gotten started in the 90s at some point. But if you think back to those early days of making videos, for you, what was like the main draw of media production, and is the same thing motivate you today that it did back then?
I think there was like sort of the ideological reason for getting excited about being a filmmaker as like a teenager in the 90s. And then there was like the artistic reason. And I think at the time I had a tough time in high school, and, my parents splitting up, and it was, I had sort of a conflicted childhood, and I was one of 4 kids, so I never felt heard. And the first time I ever played with like video editing software and I kind of made something, it was the first time I really felt like I could express myself. So I think like that's where this idea of wanting to tell stories came from, and wanting to sort of be able to share ideas and perspectives. Like that's where that motivation came from. And on like the artistic side, it was just around that time that I started learning about like Spike Jonze and Michel Gondry, and seeing some of their early films and seeing their TV commercials. I used to like download their TV commercials and their music videos, and just the kind of inventiveness that they brought to storytelling that kind of made it feel tangible. Like not only do I want to do that, but I think I can do that. And those were the early days for me. Like that's what I remember really being the ideas that I got most excited about.
And is it the same thing today?
No, not at all. It's a little bit like, like at that time it was looking out into like a pasture that was completely green and I had no understanding of. Like the first video I ever made was a terrible video about a birthday, and the video was like 15 minutes long, and I just used all the music from Pulp Fiction. It was like a disaster of a video, but I made it, and that felt really good, and that was really satisfying because I'd never made anything before. And now, I find myself being more critical of myself. I find myself wanting to push harder and further and do things that I haven't done before. And that's not as sort of as freeing as, being open to kind of discover, your process.
So, people who have, been following you for a while, know of, they've seen you hundreds of times, thousands of times, I guess. I don't know how many total vlogs there were in New York, but hundreds at least, right? You had this whole setup where, it was like any other TV show where you have a whole cast of characters, right? You had Casey, the main character, you had Marlon, the delivery guy, and Sam, the neighbor, and Candace, the wife, and the city itself was like a character in a sense. It had its own personality. Now you're in LA. LA has its own personalities as well, but one kind of character that's missing is the studio. There's not like an LA equivalent of the New York studio. So if you consider the videos that you've made in LA, how has that changed your overall like production workflow? Not having that same kind of dedicated studio space, or do you have a studio space that the world just doesn't see?
No, it's less about the physical space. If anything, the space is easy to access out here. It's more sort of what the city provided from like a stimulation or interest sort of creative place. Like when I was a little kid, I lived 3 hours outside of the city, and my parents would take us there. I don't know, maybe once or twice a year. I remember visiting New York City. And that was in the 80s, and it was like this big, mysterious, kind of impossible city. But that was also when movies like When Harry Met Sally and like Big were made, and they captured the city in such a way that like it became this incredible place that I was fascinated by. And I moved there as soon as I could. I was 19 when I moved to New York City. Everything about that city fascinated me. So every day when I would wake up with a camera in my hand, when I was doing my daily show on YouTube, all I have to do is step outside and a story would just hit me in the face. And that's what sort of the vlog was. It was, like 800 episodes about this city. And, it was how I saw things, but I could make an episode just as easily about something small and kind of meaningless, or something much bigger, like I think of snowboarding through New York City, where the central character was Manhattan. Like I use Frank Sinatra's New York, New York, and I'm coming around like the Fifth Avenue through Times Square with an American flag. It was a celebration of that city. And then I make videos where the whole video is just dedicated to me complaining about how the flow of bicycles come off of the Williamsburg Bridge and how it's dangerous, and how the city needs to change it. And I got a ticket for going the way that is illegal, but how it should be, because it's safer. And then the city changed it, which is like, I don't know if it was because of me, but I'm taking credit for it. And that's like that. But those are really two different examples that sort of cover the spectrum of what that city provided somebody like me.
So, you're a guy that I feel like on a number of vlogs you have, you cover and you talk about production gear quite a bit, and yet at the same time I get the sense that you have this attitude that actually gear isn't that important. Like you're very reliant on the story and the characters and all that. The old studio space was highly functional. Marquez Brownlee had a famous YouTube video where I think he called your studio insanely functional. And there's videos of you in there, using it like a garage. You're sort of modifying your tools. You're making graphics using your overhead shot and. So now that you have lost that functionality for the vlogs in LA, do you think it's changed the types of stories you tell, or have you just found new ways to sort of go through the same process?
Well, because of like that sort of romantic story that I just told about New York City, the city had also become sort of a big crutch for me. Like that was always what I looked to. I always used these same sort of devices in storytelling. So coming out here, I don't have that. So like not having my studio sucks, because like that studio, after being there for 18 years or whatever, you could point a camera in any direction and it was a good set. It looked cool. And it was an expression of like years of occupying this tiny space. And like I work out of my house here, and like that's only gotten more sort of confined since COVID restrictions began. And it's definitely changed the mentality. Like the space doesn't feel like it's mine as much. It feels like, it feels like it's a part of a different aspect of my life. So in that regard, like that's less of a technical answer, but it's changed the way that I approach things. And then technically it has as well. I recently switched to the Sony A7S III, and I've found the way that I shoot with that, especially within the confines of my house, to be very different from how I would use like a camera like that in my studio.
Mm-hmm. So have you found, are you saying that it's more difficult to find and tell stories in LA? Is the process harder here?
Because I know the city less. I mean, I think Los Angeles is a fantastic place, and I think that it's obviously rich with all kinds of culture and history. But I've been here for a year, and I didn't have much of a relationship with this place prior to that. Whereas New York City was a city I'd romanticized since I was a little kid. So it just feels very new here, and it's exciting and it's interesting, but everything feels very, very new in a way that feels far from how familiar everything in New York City felt.
Mm-hmm. I always find that, like in Manhattan specifically, like you can just stumble upon like, oh, I'm here. Like I'd be lost, and all of a sudden I'd be like, oh, I've seen this in a million movies. Surely there's lots of places in LA, but you don't stumble across anything in LA because you can't just stumble anywhere. You got to drive somewhere to see something, kind of be going to somewhere. Maybe you drive past something, but in New York, there, you could just be walking around and get somewhere, whereas, you could see something on the other side of the freeway. No, I'm not getting there by foot. So maybe the distance plays a lot of into that, getting to know the area. I guess it's a much larger area for sure.
Yeah. And you know what? One of my favorite things about living in Los Angeles is the driving. I never drove. I lived in New York City forever. So there's no need for a car unless you're like leaving the city. But here I get in my pickup truck and I look for an excuse to drive some distance because it's very calming. I like put my AirPods in, I like catch up on phone calls, and I talk to my dad, and it also enables me to sort of explore the area in a really rich way. So I think that the traffic in those aspects of living in LA versus New York, just the sheer size of this city, because of COVID and because of the nature of what I do, I'm able to avoid the stresses that come from that and really look at it as a positive.
So if we sort of pivot to kind of your trademark look, I always think of Casey Neistat's look as, a combination of these gorgeous, time-lapse shots or, aerial drone footage, and also like Sharpies and whiteout, right? Like handwritten graphics, and you're doing your lower thirds or whatever it is, your graphics written on a card or a piece of paper, and your personal handwriting comes through as part of that style. So it's a very unique signature look that you have. Can you tell us a little bit about like what was the process of creating that look? Was it deliberate, or did it sort of happen organically to make that?
No, this is for me, like finding that aesthetic and that sort of tone that I think has definitely had some role in all of the videos that I've ever made. It was sort of a process of not knowing the correct way or the typical way of I'm plugging in my computer here, of filmmaking or storytelling. And in the absence of knowing how to do it in a more formal way, my brother Van and I, in the early days, like when we were making our HBO show and even before that, we would just sort of look around and say, what tools do we have at our disposal? We know we'd have some sort of story, but we're like, we have all these holes in it. How do we fill those holes in? And it's like, well, let's just draw a quick animation to explain that. And it's like, cool. And it's like, well, let me just show this to sort of fill that gap in a way that thematically makes sense. And when I think of the time lapses or like some of the stuff, the techniques that I use in so much of the vlog, I think of that similarly. Like I needed a way of bridging scenes. I needed a way of setting the tone and setting the environment. And something like a time lapse, especially in 2015, that's like a really cheap, what's it like cost per value equation there. Like I just set my camera down, click record for 4 minutes and pick my camera up, and people would be like, wow, this guy is like a virtuoso cinematographer. And it's like, whoa, no. I literally just put the camera down. And I think it's because as long as the picture was beautiful, it had an impact on people. So, all of those techniques that sort of have defined the signature or the look that is synonymous with my work. It was just like needing to fill a gap. iMovie 1.0, back in the day, before we had Premiere, before I had Rush on my phone, you had like one font choice. So if you wanted to do a title, it was like some terrible title with a terrible animation, and that was it. So it's like, okay, I don't want to do that title. What can I do? And then you get out a pen and a paper and you just film the paper. So again, it was like there was a hole in the process, and we just sort of filled it with whatever kind of tools we could come up with, whatever kind of devices we could come up with.
You know, it seems like what often happens with this kind of thing is, you know, when something is done production wise with like the low production value version of this, like the hand-drawn titles, it either comes across as like intentionally what it is and it comes off as good, which is I think what your stuff comes off as, or it just like falls flat, right? Like, oh, that's amateurish. And you know, I think you could probably tie, you know, if we were trying to figure out why does Casey Neistat stuff work, you know, it's handwritten stuff. Like the handwriting is like, it's legible, but it's like intentionally kind of like normal handwriting. It's not like perfect handwriting or whatever. And, you know, are thinking about, well, it might be the, you know, how tight all the editing is or how clear the story is that sort of, you know, piecing these two things together says, okay, well, this is an intentional look and it sells because of that. Or maybe it's a few years of sort of the YouTube aesthetic catching on and people becoming accustomed to things like handheld shots and the reversed, you know, selfie mode shot or something. But I don't know. Do you have any insight into that, or when you started, did it feel as good as it feels now?
You know, it's tough to think of it in that context. I think for what excites me is this idea that like so much of what we see is perfect. What we see on television is perfect. Whether the lighting in like a morning talk show or a sitcom, it's flawless. Kids' cartoons aren't hand-drawn anymore. It's all computer generated, and it has this look of just perfection. And with all of that technical perfection, you sort of lose sight of the human hand. You know, like I'm really upset about Thomas the Tank Engine, because when my older son is 22 now, when he was a baby, Thomas the Tank Engine was all stop frame, animated, shot with real cameras, with real hardware, with a train that actually existed, with like really beautiful voiceover about beautiful ideas. And now it's this sort of CGI, plastic, garbage, uninspired pile of mush. And when you watch the old ones, you can imagine a human being moving that little train, and you know that it existed. And you look at the new ones, and it's just like, wow, like some AI spit this thing out. What am I looking at? So with my own work, I always find that like there's a threshold where like, yes, you know, the software, the hardware I use, I can make everything flawless. I can color correct the nines. I can make it look like, you know, I can make it look like a Hollywood movie using this technology. But there's a price for that. And I think the cost of that is losing that human hand. Like, no, I'd rather have it be a little bit fucked up, because then you trust that it's just me doing it. If the shot's perfect every time, there's no way you can preserve spontaneity. And to me, spontaneity does this much for a story. And having like razor sharp focus 100% does like this much, you know, when you're watching a YouTube blog. So yeah, I like to leave the scars in there. I like to leave the mess ups in there. I like the audience to know that like it really is just me sitting in front of my computer editing all night, making this. And you know, it sort of goes hand in hand with like my single favorite compliment is when somebody sees anything I've ever made and they're like, I think I could make that. Because I know when I was a kid watching like, you know, the Spike Jones, Michel Gondry, looking at Wes Anderson's early work, it's like, that's incredible. And I want to make that. So the idea that people are able to say that and see my work as accessible, that's a part of it too.
Mm-hmm. I always like the idea of leaving some space in your work for the audience. So, in your art, there's a place for someone to feedback from it, and the ability to see themselves represented in the image, or in some way connecting that way, will give them deeper meaning. I think that there's a lot to just keeping that human fingerprint on things. I think the same thing's true with digital music and all the rest, that there's the more, we had to leave the flaws in before because there wasn't a way to get rid of them. Now you can get rid of them all, and it was the flaws that made it endearing. And I think those are the things. I mean, I think especially for your aesthetic, you did it so many times that it became your look. And then, of course, was very successful. So then it became very emulated, and authenticity sells really well on YouTube. And I think that's a really, strong pair of trying to be authentic, coming off as authentic, which of course are two different things sometimes. And then, just that the audience wants that. Now, obviously you cultivated that audience, I'm sure too.
So, Casey, you're famous for, at least you're famous in our spaces for, insisting on editing your own work. And, anyone who edits video knows that that's a ton of work. And, if you think about, the days when you were in New York making a video a day, not only shooting it, but also editing it, you have to have, along the way, picked up a bunch of productivity tricks. Even considering you're putting in, however many hours every day, there's got to be places where you can sort of pick up some productivity. So do you have any editing tricks you could share with our audience to help them with their productivity?
Probably not, but the reason why I was able to hit that kind of inertia with editing my videos, I think, is because I got to a place where I was writing the video and I was writing the edit while I was shooting it. So this advice is a little bit maybe more narrow and speaking to YouTubers who typically work by themselves, which is a lot of the community. But the more you know what you're trying to shoot when you're shooting it, the easier the edit's going to be. And when I think back to the cadence and repetition of just uploading every single day, it got to a point where I was just sort of linking scenes together in my head as I was shooting them. And then when I was editing them, it was like they were laid out in a way that was really easy to approach. And then software today has gotten so good. I don't know that kind of thing 10 years ago would have been possible just based on what editing software looked like that long ago. The things that we can do now, things you can do now in Premiere, like they show me their new features that are coming out, and it's like one single feature they'll launch is like, oh yeah, that was like an hour and a half every single night trying to put those subtitles in there, trying to figure out where those lines were in there so I could, trying to find consistency in color, like some of these new technical features that are being rolled out all the time, like that's time. That's what that is. It's like here's a new product feature. Here's a gift of 1 hour. And that made it easier. So, it was like, I don't think I ever got any better at editing from a narrative point of view. I just think I got better at sort of using the software rather, to realize something that I had a really clean understanding of when I was importing that footage.
So it sounds like your shooting ratio was pretty low. Like, was there much left on the cutting room floor?
Yeah, in the days of the vlog, not really.
Yeah. I
mean, sometimes I would shoot more. It sounds silly, but sometimes I'd shoot more scenes than were needed. Typically a vlog, I'd try to have it be like 3 acts, 3 scenes, 3 different environments to carry you through. Beginning, middle, and an end. And sometimes I'd have 4 or 5, and I could make that work by merging them or having like a non sequitur, something I could make it make sense. And other times it just didn't work. So I would just sort of omit entire chunks of the vlog to make the flow and the cadence more, fluid. But beyond that, no, like when I was at speed in the vlogs, like I really was using most of what I was shooting, and I was not clicking that record button unless I knew I was going to share that.
I can only imagine how long they'd take if you had a cameraman following you around, shooting you, and the audio guy as well, and special teams to go make sure that this one place was open for you and all this kind of thing. And then all that stuff needed to be communicated to the editor, and then the producer had to sign off on the edit, or it could just be all you in your head. And you get to be the, this is done. I mean, I always being able to be the one to go, nope, this is complete. That there's a lot of strength in that, in that, 5 other people could watch it and have drastically different opinions and say, no, there's still 2 or 3 more hours worth of editing in there. But being that you got to make that choice of, no, this is what I was intending to do. And of course you can say that with certainty, being that you're the only one that was part of it, but that a bigger team, that would be just to make your daily vlog. There's no way they could turn them in a day, maybe after a month of doing them and having one come out after that. But the bigger process just wouldn't be able to happen. Though I imagine a lot of that gets a lot easier with a lot of the productivity and communication tools that there are now.
Yeah, I think that technology enabled sort of what you just described. Like, technology is what makes it so one person can do the work that used to take 10 people.
Totally.
That's a really big part of it. Like, you can't underscore enough the role that technology has played in enabling that. But I think the other side of that too is willing to forego a lot of the technical benefits that you have from working with a team in order to capture your story by one person. So there are trade-offs, totally. I do like working with a team, even though if I worked with a team, there's no way you could work at the same sort of speed.
Yeah.
And as far as sort of agency over what's being created, you're absolutely right. When there's nobody working with you on a project, when literally the idea goes from inception in your head to having a finished product that you share with the world, and you never shared it with anyone, you never wrote it down, it never left your brain. Like, that is a sense of agency that is wholly satisfying, but also terrifying.
Yeah, totally.
Because the beauty of like collaboration is, if you guys fail, it's like, it's his fault.
Yeah.
It is. I'm teasing, but it's a much more collaborative. We're in this together, and we all thought this was the best work. But when it's just you, you got to really own everything you put out there, and that's sometimes really freeing, and sometimes it's really depressing.
I could see the ebbs and flows of that. Of like, I have this idea, I shared it to the world, no one else saw it, and it was just amazing. Everybody loved it, great response. And then you make another one, and it was just the exact opposite. And how up and down that would be. I would imagine rather difficult to have the highs and the lows at such a spectrum. Although I imagine success is success, I guess, in the way of.
Have you ever seen the video I made years ago, and it's called "Crazy German Water Park"?
Probably. I don't remember it specifically.
Okay, the story of the video is I was in Germany for something, and I brought my son, who was 15 then. I brought him with me on this business trip to Germany. And then he and I went to the world's largest indoor water park or something like that. And we slept in the water park because you were allowed to do it. Even though nobody did it, you were allowed to do it. And I made a video, and it was really a father and son video about Owen and me exploring this water park. It's not a very good video. And I put it out there because it was me and my kid, and I liked that.
Yeah. And
it went nuts. I think it did like 20 million views. Wow. It was everywhere. And that one sort of, I understand it now, but that one sort of perplexed me. I was like, that's not a good video. Like, that's not, like, a guy came up with me in a car rental place and was like, I liked your water park video. And I was like, oh, sorry about the second act. I should have cut those shots that make it all boring. But I realize now, like, that just happened to be like touching a sort of a YouTube algorithm, like 3-pointer. That, like, the thumbnail was really enticing. Crazy German Water Park is kind of a cool title. And then the fact that we slept inside this water park, I presented it in a way in the video that made it seem like maybe we weren't supposed to. And I think that was just enough intrigue to make people like feel like they got their 4 minutes out of that video, and it went gangbusters. But that's one of those ones where, like, I didn't have confidence in it. And I showed it to my friend Oscar, who's a really smart filmmaker, and he's like, "Yeah, the video kind of sucks." And I was like, "All right, I'm just gonna release it anyway." And then it did 20 million views. So you never know. There's very little science here.
Yeah, you just did the thing that that we were joking about. blaming the bad video on your partner, but you did the opposite, which is the video you made but yourself, you blame the success on the algorithm. Right? Kind of ironic, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Generous.
So just sort of winding down here, I want to ask you, our typical question about if you had a secret you could give to our listeners or our viewers, about how they can, more effectively create their own kind of signature look or signature style, which is actually a very, very difficult thing to do. What would that secret be?
Well, one, I want to thank you for asking that question, because I think finding your own signature style is undervalued. And typically people ask a question like, what tips can you give to make someone succeed on YouTube? And I think success or views on YouTube are overvalued. Mm-hmm. So I would always rather find a fantastic artist that blows my mind, who has a few hundred followers, than to find someone with 1 million followers who makes work that doesn't speak to me. Okay, so as far as finding your own creative aesthetic, your own creative tone, your own creative style, I think the most important thing is that you're making your work for sort of an audience of one. You're making it for yourself. And I like to think of that in terms of like, before I click upload or make anything, like if I were showing this in a theater, a movie theater that was filled with the people I respected the most in the world, would I be really proud of what I'm sharing? And if the answer is yes, it doesn't matter what happens after that point. It doesn't matter if you get 1 million thumbs down. It doesn't matter if nobody watches it. As long as like when you finish your work, you felt that good about it. As long as you follow that, and that's your only metric for what is good and what you want to put your name on, I think that's a path to really finding something that's true to yourself, something that's unique, something that maybe others will identify you with.
All right. Great advice from the guy who's got it figured out for sure. Casey, thanks so much for giving us some time today. It was a great conversation.
Sorry about the screaming kids in the background. I hope it didn't interrupt too much.
I didn't hear any kids at all.
All right. I think you did good. I was trying to hit the mute button.
All right. Well done.
Good to speak with you guys.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Big thanks to Casey Neistat for joining us. Again, if you want to claim our course on how to be successful on YouTube, which is typically bundled in our $20 a month membership program, you can get it for free by going to videomaker.com/Casey. This is an exclusive offer, so be sure to pick that up. And we hope you enjoy it. Hope you learn a lot. As always, if you've been listening to the podcast and you enjoy it, we'd love it if you went to iTunes and gave us a nice written 5-star review. We really love seeing those. And it's really, really helpful for the podcast. So we'd love it if you did that. So for Chris Monlux and everyone here at Videomaker, I'm Mike Wilhelm, and you've been listening to the Videomaker podcast. We'll catch you next time.